Hey there, everybody! Welcome back to Reacteria. I've mentioned before that I have a huge playlist of videos that people send to me, and every now and then I like to just scroll through that playlist and see if anything jumps out at me. And this time, I thought it would be fun to pull out the videos that I get sent the most frequently, things that I see in my inbox all the time, and that I could do like a little clip show where I rapid fire react to several different arguments all at once. And that is not how the situation unfolded. You see, the only parameters that I used to select these videos were, one, that it was recognizable, it had been sent to me so often that the thumbnail or the title stood out amongst the rest, and number two, that it was short, around 5 minutes or so. And even though the content of the videos wasn't something that I was selecting for, when I reviewed them in order to make sure that they were worth putting in this episode, I noticed a striking similarity between them. So I'm going to show you all three videos, I'm going to respond to all three videos, and I'm going to talk about the major overarching problem with all three videos. But before I do that, I have two groups of people that I want to thank. First, of course, is my patrons on Patreon, the reason why this channel has been able to grow as fast as it has. You guys are the breath in my lungs, the sun in my skies, the food in my fridge, because you're the reason why I have any. And secondly, I want to thank the sponsor of today's video, NordVPN. Nord is actually in the middle of a major cybersecurity awareness campaign right now. They want you to know more about phishing and malware and ransomware and man-in-the-middle attacks and DDoS attacks and password attacks and more. And on top of that, not only are they offering the same massive discount on a 2-year plan that they usually offer my subscribers, they're also offering 4 months free, y'all. That's 4 months on top of the 2-year plan. So you get 2 whole years of great service at an amazing price, and then an extra 4 months at no price at all. You can't beat that. Do you ever worry about viruses, or worms, or Trojans, or having your information stolen, or the fact that the internet is terrible? If you answered yes to any of those questions, then you deserve to get a great VPN at a great price, and you can do that by going to nordvpn.com/ValkyLabs. Nord protects you from malicious sites, trackers, and ads. Their threat protection service is on even when your VPN is off. They have over 5,000 servers in over 50 different countries, so you never have to sacrifice speed for security, and you can explore the internet without limits. It is an amazing deal, and you gotta check it out. So when you're ready to take control of your internet privacy, go to nordvpn.com/ValkyLabs and learn more. And now, let's check out these videos. So we're gonna start out with this video from a channel called Engineering Made Easy, called Scientists Found Proof of God in DNA Code, Evidence of God, the God Code, God DNA. Maybe I should start titling my videos like that. Something like, Scientist Found Bad Argument in Pseudoscience Video, Evidence of Nonsense, The Lies, Evolution is Real. Would you click on that? Because almost 1 million people clicked on this, so they must be doing something right.
Hi, I'm Lalit Vasist, and you are watching Engineering Made Easy.
Hi, I'm Forrest Valky, and you're watching Reacteria.
Scientists have found proof of God in the code of DNA.
Okay.
But what did they found in the DNA code that made them believe in the existence of God?
I don't know, I was hoping you'd tell me.
Keep watching the video to get the answer.
Oh, good.
As you know that a computer program is a series of binary numbers, that is ones and zeros.
Right.
This sequence of ones and zeros instructs the computer what to do.
Sure.
In the same way, all the functions that are taking place inside the cell of the body are controlled by an incredibly complex and extremely long code written in the DNA, which is placed inside the nucleus of all the cells of our body.
Well, it doesn't control all the functions and it's not in all the cells, but that's fine. Go on.
But now the question arises, how this complex code of DNA convinced scientists of the presence of God?
Oh, that's what convinced them? I wasn't clear because earlier...
Let's try to understand it with the help of a simple example. No program has ever been written by chance. If you are a computer programmer, then you can understand how much intelligence, concentration, creativity, pain, and time it takes to write a simple code of just few hundred words if we want to get a task done by instructing a machine. Can that computer program be written without an intelligent programmer by itself, by chance? No. So how can we think that this incredibly long code of 3 billion letters that is unbelievably complex and the densest storage of information in the universe can be written without any super intelligence behind it? Who is that programmer? That must be no one other than the God itself.
And here we land at the actual argument. DNA is so complicated that some superintelligence must have coded it. And that is the whole argument. Here's the last bit of the video.
Therefore, according to many scientists, God has shown its presence in the DNA code by showing his infinite intelligence.
That's it. This whole video, this 7-minute video, could be summarized in less than 10 seconds. Computer code can't write itself, which, yes, it can, but whatever. DNA is kind of like a computer code. No, it's not, but whatever. Since computer code is so complicated that it requires a designer, DNA being so complicated means it must also require a designer. And therefore, a bunch of unspecified scientists believe in God. And that's the video. But before we go any further, I want to look at this second video, which is called Stephen Meyer Unmasks the Coding of Human DNA.
We've shown that DNA is actually the software of life. It's totally interchangeable between the digital world and the biological world.
Does any of this sound familiar?
The DNA code itself is so digital, is so almost exactly like a computer tape.
You see where this is going, right?
Scientists have come to the amazing conclusion that our bodies contain digital code. In fact, Bill Gates, you know, the founder of Microsoft,
The guy who isn't a biologist,
tweeted, "DNA is more advanced than any software ever created." Think about it. A program or code is written by someone very smart. The more complex the code, the more intelligent the author has to be. So here's the question. If our DNA code is more complex than any man-made software, where did it come from? Is it possible it was authored without an author, programmed without a program?
yes, because DNA is neither a program nor a book. Those are analogies, not definitions. When you use language like authored without an author or programmed without a programmer, you're taking for granted the idea that DNA was actually authored or programmed, which it wasn't. To say that DNA must have a programmer because it couldn't have programmed itself is like saying Odin must have driven all the frost giants away, because there aren't any frost giants around and they didn't drive themselves away. You're assuming the explanation and then using the perceived consequence of the explanation to validate the explanation. See that? See how that doesn't work?
If we know the computer glitches won't produce a new video game, how much sense does it make to believe that glitches, copying errors, and our DNA code can produce new organisms? Could random mutations in DNA really produce this?
Yes.
This?
Yes.
This?
Yeah, wait. Yes.
What about this?
Yes.
This?
Yes.
This?
Yes.
This?
Yes.
This?
Yes.
This?
How many times are we gonna do this, dude?
Or this?
I like how that one just says girl. All the other ones have the name of the animal, but that one doesn't say human. It just says girl. Wait till these guys find out that girls are humans.
Everything we know about software shows that random changes in a section of functional code or functional information is going to degrade that information long before you ever get to something fundamentally new. And that's the problem with the mutation selection mechanism as an explanation for new genetic information. Information in DNA is also essentially typographic or digital.
The difference, of course, being that software is actually designed by humans. So every single part of it has an intended purpose. And if you were to change even one letter in that software, then you could destroy the functionality of it in whole or in part. But DNA is not designed by humans. And so there are a lot of different ways that it can change, and those changes could either be beneficial or they could be deleterious, or they could be silent, because these two things are analogs. They are not the same. So to say doing this to software has this bad effect, and therefore doing this to DNA has the same bad effect, is a silly thing to say, because that is not how analogies work, dude.
So just how unlikely is it for random genetic changes to produce something new, even something as modest as a protein structure with a new function? One scientist performed experiments that enabled him to actually calculate the odds, and they aren't good. In fact, they're next to impossible. We caught up with a molecular biologist, Douglas Axe, in Seattle.
Douglas Axe is the Maxwell Professor of Molecular Biology at Biola University. Never heard of them. Let's look them up. Biola University is a private evangelical Christian university.
Axe calculated the probability for all the chance mutations in all of the life forms on Earth for billions of years. And in all that time, he found they couldn't chance on even one new functional protein structure. Not one.
Scholar.google.com. Protein evolution. Integrated View of Protein Evolution, a book on protein evolution. Laboratory-directed protein evolution. Selection of best fit models of protein evolution. Heterotachy, an important process of protein evolution. Reproductive protein evolution. Adaptive protein evolution in Drosophila. Protein evolution by molecular breeding. Biophysics of protein evolution. Protein evolution on rugged landscapes. Let's go with adaptive protein evolution in Drosophila. Drosophila is a genus of fruit flies, and they're super important for genetics and evolution research because they reproduce really fast. For over 30 years, a central question in molecular evolution has been whether natural selection plays a substantial role in evolution at the DNA sequence level. Evidence has accumulated over the last decade that adaptive evolution does occur at the protein level, but it has remained unclear how prevalent adaptive evolution is. Now that sounds really interesting, but there's actually a couple of citations here for the claim that evolution does occur at the protein level. So let's check those out. So here we've got molecular evidence for natural selection and statistical methods for detecting molecular adaptation. The stats paper is a little bit more recent, so we're going to go with that one. The past few years have seen the development of powerful statistical methods for detecting adaptive molecular evolution. These methods compare synonymous and non-synonymous substitution rates in protein coding genes, and regard non-synonymous rates elevated above synonymous rates as evidence for Darwinian selection. What they're talking about here with synonymous versus non-synonymous substitutions is just point mutations. You've almost certainly heard me talk about those before if you've watched this channel for a little while. Remember, a point mutation is just changing one single letter in the DNA code. You are mutating it at one single point. And that's also called a substitution because you are substituting one letter for another. Now, because DNA is read in sets of 3 letters called a codon, and each codon codes for an amino acid, which then builds a protein, that single point substitution could change the amino acid, which then changes the resulting protein. But remember, it's not a 1-to-1 ratio between codons and amino acids. There are sometimes multiple codons that code for the exact same amino acid. So you could change that one letter of the DNA and nothing actually happens. It doesn't change the amino acid being coded for, so it doesn't change the protein. So that would be called a synonymous substitution, because the protein before and after the change are synonymous. They're the same. If, however, the new codon does code for a new amino acid and therefore changes the protein, that would be called a non-synonymous substitution, because the protein before and after are not synonymous. They're not the same. And all this paper is saying so far is that the non-synonymous substitutions are better evidence for Darwinian selection, because duh, how are you going to test the differential selection pressures on 2 of the same thing? The abstract then goes on to say, numerous cases of molecular adaptation are being identified in various systems, from viruses to humans. And then from there, they talk about several statistical models for like detecting and measuring these things. And this paper was published in the year 2000, so it's 22 years old. It starts with the words, the past few years have seen the development of so-and-so. So like, this was already old news when they did it. And again, this is just one random paper that I pulled out of another random paper that I pulled out of the treasure trove of random papers on protein evolution that are freely available for anybody to read. Which raises the question, how can these things be out there when Douglas Axe proved that protein evolution is impossible? Hey, Editing Forest here. When I reviewed that section, I felt like it just wasn't quite good enough, because the papers that I showed kind of just casually mentioned that protein evolution is a thing, and then they went on to talk about other stuff. And the point that I was making there is that, you know, protein evolution is not only observable, but it's so common that we can do statistical analysis on it. But I felt like it would have been a little bit harder hitting if I had actually included a paper specifically just about how proteins evolve and displaying new functions, because that is the actual claim that the video is making, is that that's not possible. So again, it took me all of 2 seconds to find this. This one is called Mutational Effects and the Evolution of New Protein Functions, and it talks about the pleiotropic effects of mutations. What that means is that one mutation doesn't change a protein so that it does exactly one other thing, but in fact mutations can sometimes have branching ramifications with lots of different things that happen because of them. And then it talks about several factors that affect the divergence of new protein functions, including mutational trade-offs and hidden or apparently neutral variations. Anyway, if that section of the video were like a chapter in my thesis, I would have said that needed a little bit more evidence, so there it is. Hope that helps. Bye-bye.
When we see information in a digital form in software, or we see a paragraph in a book, and we trace that information back to its source, we always come to a mind, not a material process. So we can apply that knowledge to the question of historical biology. And when we see that information is the foundation of life, we can infer that the best explanation for the origin of that information is in fact also a mind, a conscious agent, not an undirected material process.
I can't stress this enough. Calling DNA a code or instructions or information or a program is an analogy. Analogies are just teaching tools. They are not meant to be taken literally. They are not supposed to be perfect representations of whatever you're comparing them to. Just because you can compare two things doesn't mean that you can draw the same conclusions about them as well. Saying that computer code is super complex and has to come from a mind, and therefore DNA being super complex means that it must also come from a mind, makes exactly as much sense as saying computer code is super complex and was invented in the late 1800s, therefore DNA being super complex means it must also have been invented in the 1800s. We'll talk more about why this makes no sense in just a minute, but I want to squeeze in one more video here. This one's called Expert Destroys Darwin's Theory in 5 minutes. However, before we move on, I think it's really important to point out that the video with Stephen Meyer ends like this.
We are not materialists. We see the human soul. We experience love. We live with purpose. We fight for justice. We acquire majority, and we will be quiet no longer.
Terrifying.
Now, it turns out, if any of these parts are missing, the trap doesn't work. So not only is it complex, it's what I called irreducibly complex. You can't take a part away and still have it work. If you took away this hammer, the mice don't get caught. Take away the spring or the holding bar, any of the pieces, it doesn't work.
My original thought after seeing that was to break down the functionality of a mousetrap and to sort of half-jokingly talk about how it totally could have evolved, quote, quote, over time, but it turns out somebody else already did that. Their name is John McDonald from the University of Delaware, and it bothered Michael Behe so much that he published a whole counter article proving that mousetraps really are irreducibly complex, to which someone named Alex Fidelibus published a whole website showing how a mousetrap could evolve in just 10 easy steps, to which Michael Behe responded about how this doesn't prove anything because there aren't any details about how the different parts are made or how they're attached or how flexible they are, and that, quote, when one is seriously proposing an evolutionary pathway at the molecular level, detailed questions analogous to these become crucial, even though he very clearly didn't provide anything even close to that in his little analogy, but whatever. For the record, Michael Behe did coin the term irreducible complexity, but he is far from the first person to make this exact same argument. We have writings of people saying that XYZ thing is so amazingly complex that it must prove the existence of a god, going back pretty much as far as writing itself. I remember in my undergrad when I was studying anatomy and we were talking about Galen. If you know anything about anatomy, you know the name Galen. And he said that all of our organ systems are so incredibly complicated and so intricately connected that they prove that God made them just this way. And he said that in the year 200. So for at least the last 1,822 years that I can think of, People have been making this exact same argument, and it is yet to be compelling.
So if we're taking that view of Darwinism, we can ask, how could something like this, something like a mousetrap, be put together one tiny step at a time? And it turns out it's surprisingly difficult. You know, if you just had the wooden platform, just the bottom, that doesn't catch mice. If you put on, say, this holding bar, you might say, well, maybe if a mouse is running along, it would trip on the platform and impale itself on the holding bar. But that's kind of just silly. So this can't be made gradually. So that's a big problem for Darwin's theory, because pretty much the foundation of life, these things are all over the place. And not only is this arrangement, this can't be put together gradually, but we immediately see that the arrangement of these parts has a purpose. And so we immediately grasp the intelligence that was needed to produce something like this. Modern science has shown that the cell is a lot like a ultra-sophisticated nanoscale factory, far, far beyond anything that humans could produce. And again, they're just chock full of machinery that is much more sophisticated than this simple little mousetrap. So not only have I become skeptical of Darwin, but you can readily see the design in life.
And there you have it. The main argument of the video, the same main argument of all three of these videos, the argument of complexity, otherwise known as the teleological argument, otherwise known as the argument of design, otherwise known as the watchmaker argument. Life is so incredibly complex, so intricately put together in such a way that it can't be broken down, so finely tuned for such a special purpose, that it must have some super intelligent designer that made it this way on purpose. Just as a watch proves a watchmaker, life proves a life maker. And it's the exact same argument, whether you're talking about life, or our position in the solar system, or the laws of physics, or the whole universe itself. It's the same thing with different wrapping paper being sold as a new product. And the problem with this argument is that there are a million problems with this argument. First and foremost, we can get super pedantic about all this and point out the fact that the only reason that we know that a mousetrap or a watch is a human design is because we know what human design looks like. Even if we knew for sure there was a designer, that doesn't mean that we know what it designed. We have no clear-cut proven examples of that designer's design. So to say that human life must be proof of its design is to make a huge amount of assumptions about what the designer is and how it thinks and what it designs and how it designs things and even what it's interested in designing. Like, what if it could be empirically proven that there was a designer, but then we found out that the only things it actually designed was the flavor of pink starburst and the patterns on paper towels? Imagine you went back in time like 100,000 years or so and you met some early humans and you showed them the device that you're watching this video on at this moment. They would almost certainly assume that it is so incredible and so intricately designed that it couldn't have possibly been built by another human, and that it is proof of a great creator. And they would be wrong, for the same reason that we were all wrong when we thought that lightning or earthquakes or rainbows or the changing of the seasons were evidence of a great creator until we learned the natural processes behind them. Life is exciting and intricate and incredible and astonishing, but that doesn't mean that it's supernatural in origin. And if you're a creationist and you're in the comment section right now writing about how I just discredited myself because I talked about something that is intelligently designed as a reason to not believe in intelligent design, go back to the part where I talked about how analogies work and take better notes. Furthermore, complexity, no matter how irreducible it may seem, is not always a good indicator of intelligent design. In fact, if something is extremely complex, especially when it is needlessly complex, like many of the systems in our bodies, that's a better indicator of unintelligent design. That is to say, bad design, or just no design at all, just plain old mistakes. Consider, for example, Michael Behe's mousetrap. If that mousetrap were more like the board game mousetrap, with a long meandering machine that expended a bunch of extra energy and was sort of ineffective at its job, that would certainly be more complex, but that wouldn't be a good indicator of intelligence. It is the simplicity of the mousetrap that makes it clear that it is intelligently designed, and life is anything but simple. And if life is designed, then that brings up a huge amount of questions. Like, I'm no engineer, but if I was, I would make sure that any innovation that I came up with was evenly spread throughout all of my products that could use it. Why is it that evolutionary innovations are confined to the lineages in which they develop? Why do birds and bats and insects, for example, all have wings, but those wings operate in different ways and have totally different histories in the fossil record? Why not just have one set template for the best kind of winged thing? It's like asking every car manufacturer to reinvent the wheel. If DNA is designed, why is it so easy to change it? Why does the environment change it? Why is it so easy to deviate away from its plan? We were comparing everything to computer codes, but a computer can't deviate away from its code, and yet an organism can deviate away from its DNA in a lot of ways. Why would phenotypic plasticity be a thing if life was supposed to behave a certain way? Why would epigenetic changes be a thing if the genome was so meticulously programmed? Maybe the whole point of DNA is that it allows life to adapt to its environment. But if the point of life is to adapt to its environment, then why not allow for evolution to make that happen better, the same way that programmers use machine learning to make codes better? And either way, if DNA was designed in a specific way, then the manufacturing and application processes should be separated. The property of life being self-replicating destroys any possibility of design integrity. Most organisms never reproduce. Most fertilized zygotes die well before any significant development. Even when life goes well, it is highly variable and needlessly wasteful, and there are countless malfunctioning or non-functioning parts of almost any species you can think of. This is nothing for any great designer to be proud of. And speaking of being proud of one's work, let's not forget that if we're going to attribute all of the marvels of life to this designer, we also need to heap upon them all of the horrors of life as well. Every parasite, every disease, every deformity, all the pains of aging, and all of the grief for those who never get to experience it are all equally part of this grand design. The stench of decay emanates from this plan just as much as the glow of beauty. It's also important to remember, just as we talked about with the video with Hank Hanegraaff, if we're gonna say that life is so complex that it needs a designer, then the next logical step is to say that that designer needs a designer, because it too must be complex. And that designer needs a designer, and so on and so on and so on forever. And to say that that isn't the case is a classic example of special pleading. Everything obeys the same rules except the thing that I'm talking about. The argument from complexity here is either self-contradictory or self-destructive. But the most important part about all three of these videos is that the idea that complex biological systems can't possibly evolve gradually has not only never been proven true, it has been proven false multiple times. For example, let's take a look at Michael Behe's book, Darwin's Black Box. In that book, he claims that flagella are irreducibly complex. Here's an article about how they evolve. He also claims that blood clotting is irreducibly complex. Here's an article about how it evolves. He also claims that transport proteins are irreducibly complex. Here's an article about how they evolve. He also claims that the immune system is irreducibly complex. Here's an article about how it evolves. He also claims that adenosine monophosphate is irreducibly complex. Here's one article about how it self-assembles in a lab setting, and another one about how it self-assembles in space. It took me less than 10 minutes to find all of those. The moral of the story is, whenever somebody says that something is irreducibly complex or shows clear evidence of design, whether it be an eye or a brain or the metamorphosis of insects or whatever, what they are actually saying is, I don't know how this works, and the only remaining explanation is magic. I want to be as clear as I can be here. The entire argument for intelligent design lacks both meaning and substance. It is unfalsifiable. It can't be tested. It makes no predictions. It has no experimental evidence to back it up. And because the entire thing is based on the argument from personal incredulity, all of the arguments that you can make for it can also be made against it, and it would make just as little sense. I don't see how random mutations could produce a new species, so life today must have come from a designer. I don't see how a designer could just whip up life out of nothing, so life today must have come from evolution. See how neither one of those things actually addressed the argument at hand? Notice how both of those statements said the exact same nothing? This is not how actual thinking works. And last but not least, if you take nothing else away from this video, I hope it's this one thing. Even if this made sense, even if the ideas of irreducible complexity and teleology carried any weight at all, even if these exact videos were so groundbreaking and so revolutionary that they cast such an immense shadow of doubt on natural selection that we just totally threw out the whole theory of evolution in its entirety, that wouldn't do anything for creationism. That would not be a reason to believe in a designer, because every single claim has to stand on its own. If I have a Christmas present and I can prove to you that I didn't buy it, that's not an argument for the existence of Santa Claus, because ignorance is not evidence. Do you understand now just how bad this argument is? Like, is it starting to make sense? This argument is so bad that even if it were good, it would still be bad. Overall, I would like to give these videos a collective science teacher challenge level, maybe 2 out of 10, but I'm actually gonna bump them up to a 5, just because of how common this argument is, how easy it is to trick people with it, and how careful educators need to be about it. If somebody doesn't know a lot about evolution or these complex biological processes, which, let's be honest, most people have no reason to, then they can be pretty overwhelming. And especially if they've already been exposed to misinformation like this, it's very easy for young scientists or non-scientists to fall into the trap of thinking that everything is just so perfect that it can't possibly have a natural explanation. And the proliferation of this argument into the repertoires of so many different creationists is a testament to its ability to so bluntly challenge basic logic that it allows the people who are indoctrinated by it to then apply that same faulty logic to other things, and it quickly becomes like a security blanket against any real evidence. It's all just too perfect. We spent a lot of time on this channel talking about how evolution doesn't work the way that creationists think that it does. But if you'd like to learn how it actually does work, I encourage you to check out my new mini-series, The Light of Evolution. It's a brief introduction to evolutionary biology taught in a simple language that anybody can understand, and the first episode comes out at the end of this month, so be on the lookout for that. And with that, I'm Forrest Valkai. Thank you so much for watching, liking, commenting, subscribing, and all the other stuff you do here on YouTube. Please exit through the gift shop on your way out. Pick up one of these sweet t-shirts. If you like terrible podcasts, I've got one of those linked down below as well. Have an awesome rest of your day, and never stop learning. Bye-bye!